Let me start by saying a big thank you to the Rise Africa team for inviting me to give this lunchtime lecture series presentation. I guess I'll just jump right in. Go ahead. Maybe I want to start by saying my recent perception of the city or town or urban or whatever you want to look at it has been shaped by three books that I read between 2019 and 2020. Order Without Design by Alain Bertrand, How Markets Shape Cities. Triumph of the City by Edward Glazier, and Nairobi, A History of Nairobi, 1899 to 2012, from a railway port, railway depot and depot to a world-class metropolis by Professor Bethel Ogot and Professor Madara Ogot. So three books, one by an architect, planner on urban economics, that's Alain Bertrand, maybe you should say recovering architect. Another by an excellent urban economist, Edward Glazier. And the third by the preeminent historian in Kenya, Professor Bethel Ogot, and his son, an engineer. And in many ways, it's fascinating because this is a small metaphor, a small symbol about what the city is, this really complex human invention that brings several different disciplines together. All this fused with a journey I have undertaken over the last 5 years, really trying to capture the city as I see it in my sketchbooks. The sketchbooks probably go back longer than 5 years, but it's really from about 2015 that I have been sketching from life. And as I said, this is the perfect metaphor for the city, incredibly complex, incredibly important, incredibly difficult to read and understand if you approach it from a preconceived perspective. And if you approach it from the silo of our different disciplines and backgrounds. And I think that's what's so special about what Rise Africa is trying to do. Trying to make sure that we're able to read the city from several different viewpoints and then fuse all this together into really figuring out how we can shape urbanization in the continent. This is really about the city and its future, which is really the future of the world. And there must be sufficient time to, I think I'll end up saying this a little bit later on. This is not from a sketchbook, but this is 1987, 13-year-old boy depicting transportation in his country. That 13-year-old boy happens to be me. But it also gives a perception and reveals my bias for how I see the city. And it's a bias that has been revealed to me even further by the historical book on the origins of Nairobi. You note the buildings, skyscrapers in the distance, maybe a football field on one side, the rolling landscapes, and in many ways I had captured what the principal planners and the colonial planners for Nairobi had sought to capture. As the book reveals, Nairobi was really based on the Garden City concept by Ebenezer Howard, but also driven largely by Professor L.W. Thornton, white, I think in the 40s, was the chair of architecture in the University of Cape Town, and came up with a multiracial planning theory that was really about the neighborhood concept. And that looked to self-contained residential areas with various amenities. And in many ways, this sketch highlights that. But how do I fast forward? How have I understood the city since then? This is 2017 from the top of KICC. For a long time, the tallest building in Nairobi, but not any longer. And it, I think, captures ideally what they were hoping for. The theme of Nairobi is the green city and the sun, and all these little towers popping up from what appears to be excess greenery. This is a slightly different direction, and this is looking a little bit closer to the CBD to the right. And it was very clear that the CBD was its own object. So this was really the silhouettes that I had captured further. It's instructive to consider, even as we look at these images, that the colonialists had more control over how they could shape the city and town planning in the colonies than they actually had back home. Driving an agenda for how Nairobi would be planned was a lot easier because it was as close to a command system as could be than what would perhaps be happening in London. It's also instructive to consider that a number of the towns and the cities in the colonialists' home countries actually developed pre-deformalization of planning as a profession. And it was thus easier for them to test out this new emerging and compelling ideas on paper in the colonies. So one of the things about this view from the top of KICC is that suddenly there's less green and there's less buildings. And this was really looking to the eastern side where a majority of the Africans lived. And I will speak a little bit more to this. But the parks are beautiful. This is from Uhuru Park, perfectly picturesque. Has challenges, of course, with maintenance, as do many parks around the world. But looking across into the fixed CBD, again from Uhuru Park, one of the other things that we might want to consider is the perception from our end has not changed entirely. We are still desirous of shiny skyscrapers, as evidenced. This is actually a sketch I did in a presentation for a soon-to-come railway city in Nairobi, and fascinating presentation, excellent graphics, but it was very clear what the aspiration of the city is about, and this does not change too much from what I was conceiving. This also further reflects some of the inspirations. This is in Nairobi, Westlands. This is a real sketch. This is where Nairobi is headed to. Now, why was it possible for the city to develop the way it then developed? It's because a large segment of the population could be controlled with kipandes, passbooks, and or identity cards, and stringent zoning codes that inadvertently created a stringent zoning code. This a sketch done recently in one of the Nairobi suburbs, now fully urban. And I just took note that all of these towers did not exist. Maybe 15 years ago. Just noting, I love density. We should not fight, but embrace it. And the answer is good density is to start from the street, the public space, and not the dead park, the human experience, and then at the visuals. This extends a little bit further, and it brings us full circle to when it all began. This is now a silhouette in 2019. 32 odd years after I did the original sketch, and the tallest building, KICC, is somewhere lost within here. That's not the height differential, because there's of course some perspective consideration, but there was a time when from wherever you looked, KICC was it. And this was really the extent of the CBD, and now has stretched across. The sketch probably gets to this point here and then continues this way a little bit further. You might notice that tower from a previous sketch, and it brings us back to the question of the strong zoning. And I jump back to 1998, studying housing. The one thing that really jumped out to me was from Mema magazine. I apologize, I should have done a better job about referencing this, but this very clearly came from a Mema magazine. And something that I finally then understood in reading Ed Glaser's Triumph of the City. And in it he says that cities do not make people poor. Poor people come to cities to seek opportunities. And that's really because cities are perhaps our greatest invention. We should be embracing the notion that poor people are coming. We should not be resisting. We should not be seeking to zone them out of the opportunity. And in considering climate change and considering resilience, we must all consider this so-called ground. This is a Kenyan saying that became popular to say that you really need to get to the ground level to see what is happening. This is the same rural park that had the beautiful waterscapes and the semi-formal retail that begins to exist Coca-Cola vendor, and this is an employee of the person who then rents this space. It's not always clear who the ownership falls under, but all this is part of the city, and the beautiful images that we are seeking to capture from a high level become these beautiful images at the ground level. Different sense of organization, beautiful in their own right. This is a study of toy market, a world famous market, and I kid you not. The character is a lot that we both like and dislike. It's taken over the sidewalk, it's taken over the road, but without romanticizing it too much. We love the energy and we love the entrepreneurship spirit of the people. This is in Sagana, a little off from Nairobi, but capturing the same energy as well. And what we didn't really like is this does not fit beautifully into our garden city, into our neighborhood planning concept, with the shopping centers and the park. And they sometimes get dirty and they sometimes get unsanitary, but there's no denying the excitement of the space and the entrepreneurship and the energy and spirit of hard work. I think it was interesting that there might be a suggestion in certain circles that people are poor because they're lazy, but these guys are working hard on a Saturday afternoon and I'm sketching. It's fascinating to consider who is lazy. And the SUVs arrive to buy furniture from the joiners who have been working through the week, Sunday to Sunday. None desirous of this density within the suburbs that they will retire to, but welcome the furniture that they purchase and the labor that might come from these very same spaces. And this finally brings me to my new understanding of the city that arrived from all this. I was in Barcelona in 2018, and it struck me that the density in Barcelona was very similar to the density in the ubiquitous 50 by 100 plot in Nairobi and several parts of urban Kenya. The 50 by 100 is exactly that, 50 feet by 100 feet, approximately 15 meters by 20 meters, and then a similarly more popular one, which is actually the 40 by 80. And the origin of this is this was the smallest land parcel allowable to get an individual title. And as the population grew, and as entrepreneurs saw an opportunity to delve in the sale of, and I say sale and development of real estate, sale of land. I say that in quotes because really, do you develop land? Do you sell land, or is it a resource that should be shared? But there were a lot of subdivisions that were then done, and what became the 50 by 100, and this was supposed to be for single family residentials. I want to suggest that the 50 by 100 is not well studied, because a character on the streets that became very beautiful in Barcelona is somewhat ad hoc. There's a slight level of neglect. This is not really quite Nairobi, but close to Nairobi, in Kitale town, character is similar. And it brings me to something that Alan Bertrand raises often in the book Order Without Design. If you regulate the minimum one can consume, and that minimum is higher than what they can afford, they will simply consume what they can afford, only that they will do it illegally. And once they do it illegally, it comes with more chaos. Less anticipation around the planning. One of the fascinating things is that a 50 by 100 is almost always, it's always mixed use. Things like the signage and advertising really fascinate me. I shudder to think of how you'd regulate that without killing the momentum and the energy of the space. And further goes to an interesting suggestion that there's no color for mixed use in Kenyan zoning. Would be interested in other African countries studying and seeing what that condition is. The 50 by 100, when done, did have markets, did have shopping centers, it did have social halls, but it did not anticipate this sort of density, because they were meant to be for single family homes. And thus suddenly all those things begin to drop off and become too far away. And the question then becomes, how do we regulate and plan for this minimum consumption? And what sort of feel and look could happen? I will be honest, I have not sufficiently studied this, but I have conceived it, and there I go to end all this.